I think everybody's here, but let's just start. And I'm sorry to everybody for this difficulty, for Chris's difficulty getting on. I don't know how that happened. And also wanted to say, starting off, to just say something about what day it is, Juneteenth, and that we have in our minds the 400-year struggle for emancipation, African Americans and their allies, something we honor and remember today. Chris has been involved in university politics for most of his time at the University of California, and look what he has to show for it. Anyway, but as I said while we were waiting for you, we were just talking casually, Chris. Chris has not only been a major founder of a field, university studies. He has two really great books on the university: Unmaking the Public University, the 40-year assault on the middle class, and then The Great Mistake, how we wreck public universities and how we can fix them. And this is an almost bewildered take on a great achievement that was then let go by careless administrators, or sometimes willfully destructive ones, at the state level and the national level and elsewhere. And but Chris is, what's really impressive to me is a political activist, a theorist, an historian, an institutional analyst, but also someone who's really gotten under the hood. He knows budgets, he knows the arcana of personnel manuals and other manuals. And so what we were hoping today is that Chris could talk about the issues of shared governance, what faculty can do to get back some measure of control over the university and our lives and its mission. And also it's intended as a practical session, a strategy and tactics session. And we're assuming that in the Q&A things can range fairly widely, and people can ask questions of principle or of real, how do I accomplish X? Because I think Chris has good ideas about all of that stuff. So I want to thank you for coming, Chris, and thanks for being here, and glad we overcame the difficulties. And thanks so much for Peter joining the board next year, new member of the board, and already doing yeoman's duty. Thanks for setting this up, everybody. So what'll happen is Chris will talk, and then everybody I assume knows how to use the hand raise function, and we'll do that in the Q&A, and I'll call on people. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, happy Juneteenth, you Santa Cruz people. I'm very glad to see you. I'm very sorry that I'm not there. You're my cousins, so I'm glad we have at least this kind of reunion. I'm going to show some slides, a little bit of budget stuff, but it's mostly kind of an arc of university history, because I think that we're actually at a kind of another inflection point, and I'll be interested to see if you think this is true. It's a little bit clunky because I'm still kind of thinking this through, but I think these crises, there are at least 3 of them going on at once, are really an opportunity for kind of reimagining things. In other words, that what seems utopian normally is now just, I think, kind of necessary. So this shouldn't take more than about 20 or 25 minutes. I'm thinking I'm going to do the screen share bit. People are talking about third Reconstruction in a way that I think is actually quite helpful. My original research was kind of in the period before the first one. And then we had one that's been really battled against, the Voting Rights Act. And I don't know, it's like many decades of struggle before that, but actually, from 1877 to about 1965 or so. And basically my whole adult life has been, living through this kind of contestation around whether that one would take hold. And one of the stakes, obviously, is sort of full citizenship for African Americans specifically. But a stake that kind of lives within that and around it is just equality in general, the economically, culturally. And so one of the things I've tried to do in the university books is talk about the university as a social institution that either, kind of helps that or doesn't help that. And the last couple of books have been been focused on the austerity agenda, the sort of culture wars against, particularly against racial integration and racial equality that turned into, I think, a broader, in some ways more effective strategy for weakening and delegitimizing institutions that represent equality, full citizenship, and sort of democratic decision making. The university, although it's not very democratic or egalitarian, and although faculty are, as a group, pretty elitist and anti-equality, I think it's something we can talk about a little bit later. The institution itself represents this much more progressive agenda on the outside for good reasons as well as bad. Okay, so I was thinking about this kind of in terms of the things that I like about the university as well as the problems. And one of the interesting things about the US tradition, going back to the 17th century, but also carrying forward from there, is that it has this sort of Bildung view that is not so much the case in other countries that either came along later or had more sort of state dominated institutions than we've had. So it's a church soul-oriented Christian idea in the beginning that gets secularized very unevenly. The thing that I think is worth carrying forward is this bit in the middle, the customized formation of the individual self, where there's resources are lavished on personal developments, on individualization. And it's, the obvious glaring and still, imperfectly overcome limit to that is who gets to have this. So it's all males and they're all basically white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And that changes a little bit, but not very much as we go forward. And it also gets compromised when the public systems come along, because they're these moral act institutions, though they're focused on local development and they're inclusive up to a point, are also expansionist, settler-colonial, westward expansion institutions that a really interesting recent research project has nicely renamed land grab universities. So personal and regional development are a little bit more connected than they are in the Philistine instrumentalism that we have now. But anyway, so fast forwarding the jump like at least 100 years ahead, there's still this base in the World War II period. So the 30s is starting to develop this, and it really takes off afterwards. But what gets plunked down on top of that, and which creates places like the University of California, is the war effort and really a kind of a global dominance agenda. So we benefit from the financial expenditures that are part of that, and it has there's mission agencies that define agendas for scientific research. There's a lot of trickle down into area studies and other fields that are what we would now consider more social and cultural studies. The goal is national security, and these two things go together in a not very well, and the relationship is not particularly well theorized. So moving, a little bit further into this, these are, the little circle is private, the big circle is public. Sorry, it's a little bit created. They have somewhat different financial bases, which we don't really need to go into. As the public grows, this treatment of students really begins to split. It's because relative funding per student in the public sector is closer to the private level than now. The gap is widened. This divergence is not so hideous, but there is a difference between the individual cultivation model that you still get in places like Stanford or my alma mater, Reed College, the whole liberal arts system is very much part of this. In contrast to the massification system, and UC in particular, Berkeley really pioneered an attempt to combine very large lectures, which were just, basically push out media, with some individual attention that came in the form of sections that were primarily led by graduate students, which was justified by the fact that these were very high quality PhD programs that the graduate students were in. So the trickle down training was benefiting everybody. It wasn't like nobody understood that this was a problem. But while money was there, they could kind of keep pieces of it stitched together. And then you get this outcome where, so the people that are going to public universities are not told when they matriculate in the way that Yale first years are, that they're the future leaders of the society and that they've been handpicked to be the future leaders. But they are nonetheless part of a knowledge workforce that, John Kenneth Galbraith called the technostructure, that was the basis for the middle classes of the post-war period. And this is a more interesting formation than, it's a bit embarrassing to talk about. It seems like a really bourgeois, kind of backsliding racist really issue, some white suburbs, et cetera. But it was much more threatening to others, again, than it seems to us, in that it was a very economically demanding and entitled group that felt that there should be public expenditures on its suburbs and on its roads and on its schools and on its hospitals and on its universities. It was politically entitled. It thought that it should really be able to vote. And it had some limited but not non-existent sympathy for the Voting Rights Act and the expansion of the franchise, because a lot of its people were related to earlier generations that had been excluded on other grounds if they were white. And it had a bit of a culturally, egalitarian thing with, youth culture in the 50s and the 60s, making people feel a bit more like, the possibility of uprising was a normal thing. And the actual uprising was something that you had to take seriously. So there's civil rights activity, there's feminist activism, there's gay, Stonewall, queer stuff that's happening. And all of it is, the university is a platform or a site for it, not necessarily a sponsor, often trying to squash it internally, or control it at least. But this thing here is not nothing, this knowledge workforce thing. Okay. So there's a kind of a transition that begins to happen. And this is, I'm going to look at some budget stuff. The assumption is that prosperity, economic leadership globally, corporate dominance globally, meaning that our companies basically call the shots. So there's an obvious economic colonial aspect to this. That this is really going to keep the country thriving, and that the university, this business in here, where there's mission stuff, but there's also a lot of economic development going on in STEM in particular, that this is going to permanently sustain the strength of the nation. And then secondly, that these people down here are essential to that. They're essential workers. They're not, you need to have millions and millions of them coming out every year. And I think what begins to happen after 2000, there's a lot of stuff that could throw in here. There's 9/11, which makes security more important than knowledge. So certain kinds of knowledge that create security, especially around surveillance and spy stuff and digital security, et cetera, that kind of knowledge remains important, in the sort of the cyber warfare context. But it's not, there's the dot bomb, there's the fizzling of the first wave of the new economy that seemed to be about knowledge workers, gold collar workers, no collar workers being important. And I think elites kind of stop believing that. It seems to be like the US is really going to be more about military dominance and, full spectrum dominance in the Colin Powell sense. Then it's going to be about full spectrum knowledge that includes the humanities and the arts and the whole thing. And that we're just this like genius culture that is endlessly creative, in that sense that of the first Silicon Valley that was very much about dropping acid as well as about learning computer programming. And that's like, forget it. We're not going to do that anymore. And then down here, what's happening is outsourcing of a lot of technical stuff. The second global workforce comes online after the fall of the Berlin Wall, right? So basically, China in particular entering global capitalism with a workforce, India, the same thing. So that there's suddenly this just like a workforce that's doubled in size, and they're well educated and they're well trained and they work for a lot less. So this is like, do we really need all these Americans? So I think what's beginning to happen even before the financial crisis is a loss of faith in the generic bachelor's degree and in the direct link between what Clinton and all these people were really selling, which is if you fund STEM, you're going to have a great version of democratic affluence. They just like, it kind of stopped caring. It seemed more like extraction, monopolization, the traditional forms of rentier capitalism in the way that Piketty has talked about. That's where the action is again. It's like that. All right. So I think that there's financial evidence for this in the way that the University of California is treated by its legislature. Okay, so you've seen these, maybe you've seen them. I did a post on this a few weeks ago. Some of you have seen these. California sees itself as the leading knowledge economy of the world, right? And it's better than the rest of the US in its view. So you would logically think that it would do well by its research university at least, and it would probably try to do the same thing for the rest of its higher education segments. And that isn't what's happened at all. So the public investment, which is the red line, state general funds, these are nominal dollars, not corrected. It's gone nowhere in 20 years. Right, so we were kind of in the mid 3 billions. Then we barely got above the mid 3 billions like 2 years ago, and we're going to get busted back down there. In the best case scenario, we're going to be at about 3.8 if we're lucky, and we're probably not going to get that lucky. We're probably not going to. So a way of putting this is to say the state decided that what it really wanted budgetarily was to get all new students, and remember, these are minority majority students that are coming in since 2000 in particular. It's going to get all new students for free, all enrollment growth, and it's going to get all cost increases for free. It's not going to pay for any of that. Who's going to pay for that? Well, students are going to pay for it, and if the student ability it gets tapped out at some point, then the university's just going to have to suck it up in some way. So we'll cut benefits, or we'll cut salaries, won't grow, they'll stay subpar, buildings will be for shit, whatever. It's various ways in that. Okay, so this is the benchmark where if the university was just like an average beneficiary of the knowledge economy, this is per capita income in the state. This is money people actually have. The red line would be at the blue line. It's like you're an average agency and we'll fund you there, and that's not what's happened. We fund you less than we funded. People say, oh, well, the whole state budget, ever since Prop 13, they don't care about the public sector. Well, the purple line is the state budget, and actually the state budget has done way better than the University of California over this period. So, it's incarceration, it's healthcare, some other stuff. But the point is just, higher ed is just not the priority that in the way that people actually expend, the state actually spends money. And then the yellow line is, hey, well, what if we took this blue line and we inflated it for an inflation? Basically, this is just state CPI. It's not actually higher ed stuff. And also we inflated it for enrollment growth. And that's where you just want to break into tiers, because we would be at 10 billion in today's dollars, and we're at 4 before COVID. We were supposed to go to 4. So we're getting about 40% per student of what, again, you would expect if the state cared and thought, oh yeah, knowledge economy means lots of smart people, lots of well-educated people. We're taking that seriously, and they just don't. So I'm just saying, if you look at what they do as opposed to what they say, it's like knowledge economy is kind of a post thing. And just a little bit more data on that. When somebody like me says something like this, the response of someone like John Perez, who's the current chair of the Board of Regents, or people in the legislature, is always to say, oh yeah, but the general fund thing is one thing, but look at all the money you made by raising tuition. And we did raise tuition in 09 to 12, in that early part of the period before Brown became governor and put a stop to that. And so if you look at the core revenues defined as state general funds plus net tuition revenues, you say, oh, hey, yeah, we did do better than trends, and we don't totally suck compared to what we actually should be getting if we had enrollment and cost inflation calculated for. Okay, so I thought, well, this does not reflect the experience of any person on this call. The facilities, the size of the classes, the time that we have to give individual attention to students, et cetera. So what I did was, and this is absurdly laborious, subtracted from core revenues a couple of big things the state also pushed onto the university over this period. One is pension costs, because those restarted in 2010, and the other are capital projects, which the state basically stopped floating bonds to pay for, stopped general obligation bonds, 2006. So it's been going on 15 years. So campuses are paying quite a bit of money out of operating costs, and they are borrowing. We are borrowing. I'm chairing my CPB this year, so I'm in these chancellor's budget meetings. We just saw, for the first time ever, data on our interest payments every year, and we run in the black. Before COVID, at least, we ran in the black this year, and before COVID, subtracting interest payments, were in the red. So we were already tipping into deficit even before COVID happened. And a primary reason for that is that the state does not pay capital construction costs anymore. So to expand for the surge means that we pay for that. And I really screwed around endlessly with this stuff. And here's what happens to the green line. I did this like 5 different ways, pretty confident that this is a real green line. Some are slightly better than this. Long story short, our net, John Perez is wrong, Jerry Brown is wrong. Our net core revenues, when you subtract UCRP and capital projects, is way below the trend. Okay, so this is just a slightly tedious, nerdy Chris sort of way of having some data to confirm what otherwise just seems like a speculative statement, which is that we're post-knowledge economy and they don't care and they're not really going to fix it. They do not want expensively educated masses of knowledge workers. Whatever they say, I don't think that they see this as something that has to happen. So this brings us back to, it's just this period. And one of the things that our students are really experiencing is kind of the falling apart of this system, which is this piece of it. The top row is kind of okay. The bottom row is not okay. So this piece, I didn't fool around with the scale on this dopey kind of slide, but this one is much bigger than the other one. And we're creating essentially a 2-tier set of graduates. There are the STEM people, the quants, have the potential at least of going into sort of top 10% or top 1% by income specializations. and they can serve, platform capitalism with highly demanded technical skills. And some of these are non-technical. It can be intellectual property law. It can be a bunch of stuff that is directly focused on maintaining the hegemony of a tech platform. And there are a lot of different tasks that are involved with that. People that are doing broader, I don't know what you call it, like social developments, every kind of care worker, every kind of, and that includes teachers, everybody in health, all the essential workers that are doing transportation, food, preparation and delivery, et cetera. In other words, this whole range of human activities are in a second tier economically. It used to be then that the university was kind of bringing these groups together. They all have BAs, they're all in the same classes, they're all doing GE, they're in the same social clubs, they go to the same parties, and then they kind of graduate and they join a kind of a somewhat stratified, but not hopelessly stratified, middling social group with their kind of mid-level skills. The university is not the engine of that. The university is increasingly the engine of segregation and splitting. Okay, so in the moment in which racial integration seems like it might sort of start happening, this kind of class and intellectual skill segregation is cutting against that. And we might want to talk about like where students of color end up majoring, and something that kind of reinforces that, how much students of color pay in terms of student debts, which is significantly higher. Black women have the highest per capita student debt in the United States. And, the racial differential there is very clear, and they have lower means generally in terms of personal income to pay that back. So we have tech specialization, and we have somewhat precarious services as the output for BA students, not people without a high school degree, right? We're talking about our graduates. And you will have noticed the same thing that I have at my school, which is the increasing tendency of students to try to get masters, and the increasing tendency of places like UC to try to solve this budget crisis by starting for-profit masters that will suck these students into taking on another 50,000 or so of debt to get a master's degree, because they think that that's going to work better than a BA to get into a more stable vocation, right? So there's this kind of, there's a ratchet in terms of the educational expenditures that are private that students are expected to pay. So here's how I'm feeling about this. I'm just going to show you one more slide and then stop. My feeling is that we should talk seriously about just chucking this whole thing and not fixing it anymore. I'm pretty sick of it, frankly, making these arguments about, I endlessly showed that cuts exist, because, I'm still doing it. That third slide is about, oh, no, you're wrong to say that we're doing well if we throw in tuition. I'm a literature professor, and I've been doing this stuff endlessly. And I'm right, they're wrong, but what if they don't care? Like, what if cutting us is like, it's efficiency and you don't deserve any more than that? I mean, we don't really need you that much. And then there's a second argument that I think that faculty, and this is, when we talk about faculty roles, that we have to be more militant about, is that, well, the cuts are really affecting educational quality. And I think we should cry racism, and I think we should say, look, right around the time that we stopped being majority white, you stopped caring about educational quality. So it's like, oh, we had to have the best for white UC graduates, and now that we're a half to 2/3 not white, it's like, well, all these corner cuttings are things that you just don't bother you. So I'm perfectly happy to ratchet that up, and I think that should be said to John Perez in particular, and the folks Oakley, the people that are representing disenfranchised communities, racialized, folks who have gotten the short end and said, well, so you are now advocating giving them the short end by cutting the quality of the very university that you are insisting be more open to them. So we support your access agenda, we support your inclusion agenda, and we also want you to support a quality agenda on the very grounds of racial equality that you have built your careers on. So I think that kind of practical stuff, that, continuing that in the mode of fix the thing, how we wreck public university and how we can fix it. Well, let's, fine. But what I hope we can talk about a little bit is more like this thing, and this is more the whole mission of the university is wrong. Everything we say we do to the public is wrong. All of our explanations, all of our wheedling that we do, here's why you should pay for us, because we create jobs and we, 5-to-1 return on investment. It's all wrong. We should say what we're really about is, our inputs are global welfare and economic stability. And maybe that means degrowth. Maybe that means the end of growth. It could mean something completely different. You guys, the outside world already, you outside people, you already hate us and think we're subversives anyway. So fuck it, let's actually be subversives. And I say this to myself, because I'm the person who am really, a dyed-in-the-wool kind of radical humanist about human potential, and everybody is innately a genius. And I love that, that Prussian romantic late 18th, early 19th century stuff, and all the versions that cultures all around the world have developed about human emancipation. It's an emancipatory agenda. And yet it feels now like grafting it onto this institution isn't ever going to work. Okay, so it's like, forget commercialization. We need public benefit science. We need to stop doing tech transfer. We probably don't ever need to do any more corporate partnerships. They're tiny. We lose money on them. And the scientists that we actually want that are working for companies to partner with, faculty can do that on their own. They don't need the larger agreements to make that happen. Where we're trying to go is not a national domination agenda, but we're trying to do global economic democracy. What does that mean? Lots of different things. I'm sure you could all think of a better term than this one. But as a kind of a placeholder, the planet is not going to survive with the levels of inequality that we have, and the university is not about trying to tap wealthy people and get their approval and keep going for another 5 years with philanthropy, but it's about how do we not have wealthy people until we have like the end of poverty. Much more diverse students. We are heading towards 2/3, 3/4, 80% students of color in the UC system. What does that mean? Well, it means that California looks much more like the rest of the world than other parts of the United States do. And what it means is basically ending the massified commodity form of education that we are funded to do. That's basically all the money that we're allotted, and trying to do some other kind of unified version of, the custom formation of everybody, leading to this thing, which is total equality of capabilities for certainly across racial groups, but also the equalization of outputs, regardless of the kind of levels of education and apparent abilities that people come into the university with. So there's a lot of policies, short-term policies around in the fix-it model that I could list. We have to do a firing freeze. We need to equalize funding across different campuses in the UC system and across different sectors, because the poor students go to the poor universities, and that has to stop because it just perpetuates inequality and poverty within the system, even among college students. We need this thing I started to call Free College Plus, which is a massive increase in per student investment at the same time as college becomes free. We need to link university funding to a serious Green New Deal that would create a whole range of culture and social skills along with technical ones to make this energy transformation actually happen. We need the WPA style arts project administration, like the one the executive director of the MLA advocated on a CNN webpage about a month ago. That would be basically, guaranteed minimum income for cultural producers to bring the students that are not STEM students into some kind of economic stability so that they can, rebuild physical infrastructure and also the culture. But I think all those things would be great. I think we need a different vision to animate them and motivate them. And for me, it's basically universities are about non-monetary benefits. Students need jobs, but what we do is not that. We do non-pecuniary human development, full intellectual development of people on the basis of the goal, a very explicit goal of social equality. So I will stop there and look forward to your input on it.
I want to ask the first question because I'm up here, and I think it's a very inspiring vision, to kind of take over the university. And it's sort of Ronnie's question, which he asked in the chat, which is, so how about some practical advice on how to detour? Well, just how to sort of a little detour from within. I mean, I think that
the wrong person.
Many of us in our individual practices, pedagogical practices, do some version of this, and how to scale that up to, at least a divisional, maybe departmental, or how do you work the scaling on this, or would you have any thoughts on that?
I think we have to work with students, particularly graduate students, and you all have a particularly, committed crew at your campus that did this through the strike. It could be ported into just the formation and the pushing out of a much stronger discourse about what universities are for. I think this involves classroom teaching, so explaining to undergraduates what they're not getting and what we need to get them to them. And then I think it involves taking back our departments, which have become, at least in my experience, pretty dead. Kind of focused on hiring, competitive FTE requests, and arguing about personnel cases and stuff. Fall's about existing personnel review, and the winter's about trying to hire somebody, and the spring is about fighting about what our next hire is going to be. There isn't really a lot of articulating of the intellectual mission of the particular field, whatever it is that we're in, how that connects with the missions of other fields, and then how we can start a re-education process with our own administrations, our own colleagues in our own administrations. Another piece of this is getting the deans and the deans councils reactivated.
Yeah.
They are politically terrible.
Yeah.
They're terrible. They're completely inert. They're just kind of transmitting austerity stuff from top to bottom into departments. They're not advocating for the humanities or the arts or whatever the social sciences, anything really. And so senior managers don't really know what to do because the understanding of their departments is not flowing upward.
I want to say we got your friend as our dean up here, and you pass that on to her if you can, Chris.
Jasmine?
Yeah, she's coming.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so really, we'll play her the recording. We'll play this to her. Ronnie.
Yeah, one of the things that I keep seeing is that we remain intellectual idealists. And although, as I said in the chat, I admire your argument enormously, and I think you're right. it seems to me, and of course I can now afford to say this since I'm retiring, I guess, but it seems to me that there has to be more. There has to be more in the way of mobilization and action, and involved in taking back the university. I don't have any great ideas about that, but as you point out, you can make these arguments about the arguments that you've tried to make till you're blue in the face, and not convince your listeners, right, that you've got the data there.
Yeah.
And of course, we're in a period when a lot of this is just basically shrugged off. So I'm struggling with this. How do you actually, I think we need uprisings on campus.
Yeah.
But that's not just telling our students, right? And we do have a lot to lose from that, and we're afraid to lose it.
I think there's going to have to be another wave of strikes. So what was happening in the winter, it's kind of like a prefatory strike to what's going to need to happen later. And the other thing that I think tenure track faculty at UC are going to have to think about is unionization. The Senate has become pretty ineffectual. And we're too close to administrations on all the campuses, even if they, are always kind of fighting with us. It's, it's like a sibling rivalry sort of thing. It's not, we're the junior siblings. And they mostly don't even let us into the car, right? It's just, they don't really, both the COVID decisions are being made without us, in terms of opening up. And there'll be one person, the divisional chair will go to basically all the meetings, and then the other, everyone else is pretty much in the dark. So I think it's kind of an organizational challenge, Ronnie. And I think you're completely right and organizing and formulating of ideas go together. So the stuff that, I put together by myself in my house, where I've been for 3 months, is obviously a shadow of what a group like this would put together once we start to persuade people and we get yelled at and we get ignored and we redirect and we rethink and we argue with each other. That would make this kind of thing much better than it is right now. But I just, it's how much we really want it. Like, are we actually going to do the work in the institution and in our departments, for starters, get this going?
Leslie, do you want to get into that thing you had in the chat?
Yeah, thank you. In terms of moving forward or some place to start, there could be many places of intervention, and I think there have to be, simultaneous points of intervention and organization. I was really struck by the first slide, or something that you said on the first slide, and I might have misunderstood when you said, we need to start with the place about or keep the piece about personal formation. But there was something that you had on the slide about regional investment, and I think that you said something about land grant universities, and we need to, rethink the land grab university. But I think that there's also something that we need to really rethink about, the regional development and the University of California, and its responsibility to the regions or the communities where it is extracting resources and not giving back. And the sort of curious dynamic within California, now there's a lot of, international students as well, but the sort of mobility within California where you have people coming in just for a few years and then leaving, instead of forming a kind of a community where people are able to stay, and there's a lot of different pieces about that, the housing economy, the idea that you go away to college if you're going to a 4-year college and then you go back or you go away or something like that, the constant migration of the flexible economy these days, that is the knowledge economy. Whether we're getting knowledge or employed or not. But I wonder if, looking at the lag in the University of California in comparison with other R1 universities in terms of its engagement as problem-solving public science universities in relation to the actual regions could be a point of organizing and demand. It's really shocking what's not happening.
Yeah, so maybe all the, I think it's a really important point. The global stuff on the last slide is too bullshitty, and that really what's going to be happening now, we're also kind of post-globalization on some level. Is going to be much more regional, local sustainability, insourcing, right? So we're going to be redeveloping local skills to do stuff that we're spending absurd amounts of energy to ship across oceans, and we're going to do much less of that. I like agriculture and natural resources as that AEC unit that is always in trouble with the Senate because its budgets are like ridiculous, and it's okay, and everybody's upset about them all the time. But basic idea of extension is really good, and it just needs to be massively diversified out of agribusiness and into a full range of things that people need. So we could see having scholars and students together in communities, having like office hours, just going to bars and what do you guys need us to work on? Like, what's the issue around here? What's happening on, on your main street? What are the health needs? We just have these amazing intellectual resources that aren't operating in communities. So that is something we could. So like you guys had that Silicon Valley thing. I think that it died and then you restarted at some point a few years ago.
It's a zombie campus. Yeah.
Yeah, the Silicon Valley zombie campus. So the problem with that is that it's focused on a tech world that doesn't really care about society that much, at least at the decision level, the senior executive level, and is very narrowly focused on particular kinds of issues. But if it were what about the rest of like the people that actually live there or can't afford to live there and are commuting in from 60 or 80 miles away as like a full service social analysis center? It might get much more interest from city government, for example.
Karen?
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much for doing this. And just so many things are on my mind. But one thing that you said, Chris, is they don't care. And that really resonates, because I think that it covers just about all the things we're talking about. They don't care about the local, even though they're always talking to when I say they, I'm talking about, UCOP or our administration here. They're always talking about community, but they don't really have any sense of what that community is. It's a prop for them. So the question is, and then just one other thing I wanted to comment on about the quality issue that you also raised. And I think that is being particularly undermined now with online teaching. I mean, that I think we all were aware that over the last, in the winter and then gearing up toward the spring here, it was all about delivery and medium and nothing about anything having to do really with content or quality so that's being phased out even, more abruptly now with COVID and with, as they say, distance learning. And I take this all under the rubric of they don't care. And so that's what I wonder, how can we make them care? There's so many arguments that should we be focusing on, trying to figure out what one particular argument might be to start with, because it just goes in so many directions. And yeah, so. My first line is the one I already used, which is you're downgrading the education of your students of color. Yeah. So you're all access, but you're access to what? And so you want women too. I mean, the institution, more women in the institution, and I think the same thing can be said.
Yeah. Yeah, right. No, that's absolutely right. So there is a, we have a one-party state, right? And they're all kind of liberalish Democrats. They care about, economic growth and the traditional hegemonic industries. So, I mean, that's tech, but tech is fewer than 10% of jobs. So it's agriculture, it's construction, it's it's oil still, it's big kind of extractive industries, and none of them really care that much about universities in the first place. So I think it's kind of social peace and justice is something that they do on some level care about, that we can connect up to better. And they're just appealing to their desire, their self-interest to serve their communities in a way that their communities recognize as real, as opposed to as fake. But I think that said, it isn't just going to be arguments. It's going to be, because this is a conflict-based society that respects force and coercion more than it respects arguments and deliberative democracy, right? I mean, Germany, for example, and its labor at the table when you decide financial goals, it's almost unthinkable in the United States. So with that in mind, it's kind of like protest, striking, and rioting as the main instruments of communication. And I suck at these things. Like, I'm really a nerd. I'm not an organizer. I'm not a good writer. I'm not a great street fighter. I'm not black bloc material. So I'm not saying this is something I think this is really cool and I want to go out and do that, because I don't. But I recognize that there's a cooperativeness that is kind of done now, and a compromised discourse that's kind of done. So just one more thing, and I'll, if the Senates inside our institutions communicated continuously and directly with the full membership, honestly, about what happens in these meetings and what the financial situation is, that would be very threatening, and it would create a different kind of discourse. Like, if I go to a chancellor's meeting and I come back and I send the slides around and I say, look, we're facing either a 15% deficit next year or a 22% deficit next year on our operating budget. That would produce a galvanization that private discussions does not. And that is why we're always under these kind of confidentiality rules. So that seems like something a place to start. It's just full communication to the full membership as a talking to the people that we represent.
Miriam.
Hey, Chris, thanks for doing this. Also speaking as non-black box material, I do want to get back to this question about strikes and organizing, and particularly our role as tenure-track faculty, and the kind of risks that perhaps not the people on this call, but how to speak to our colleagues who are generally risk adverse. I mean, we saw this around the strike here at UCSC. So both the kind of language that we need to be doing and using, reaching out, but also how to think about our own positionality in taking on these more perhaps abrupt or touchy tactics that are not consensus-based, right? That language, as you were indicating, has been perhaps exhausted politically.
Well, yeah, no, that's a really good question. So the first two things that come to mind, one is COVID health. So universities need to open up for the revenues, because their polls show that as many as a third of students might not turn up as soon as you say, oh, by the way, we're going to be online. We're doing remote. There'll be a significant melt, and they're trying to avoid that by not being very open about how closed how closed the campuses might actually be. So one thing with faculty is, so you're potentially going to be put at risk, and your students are going to be put at risk. So there's just that self-interest. Second thing is, do you want to spend the rest of your career doing remote instruction? Because if you want to stay safe and you're going to do it from home, that whole part of your life, which is important to you and which is a big part of your week, every week, A, it's going to grow in terms of time commitment. B, it's going to be less satisfying. C, your students are going to hate you. You know, it's just like the whole thing is it's going to change the profession.
Yeah.
I don't know, what else do you think would work?
As a tactical entry point, Miriam, I mean, is that what you're asking, Chris? You know, where to push, what issue?
Yeah, where to push, and also, I mean, you know, coalition buildings with other unions on campus, with lecturers, with graduate students. It's not something tenure track faculty are historically very good at.
Debbie?
Well, you just named a really important thing, which is working with unions.
Yeah.
The best financial analysis of UC right now is AFSCME's trying to identify usable reserves for bridge funding. The Senate has produced zero. Literally, absolutely nothing. It's terrible.
So one question, well, thanks a lot, Chris, for this. It's great. One thing that I have found, I mean, I love the idea of breaking the confidentiality. I'm on CPB here, and there is stuff that I would love to tell people. And the pushback from the committee has been intense. You know, people don't, there really is this confidentiality. David is nodding his head because he's on the same committee. And every time I bring it up and say, I think we need to release these figures to people, there's often a sense of, well, we have to, I think we're developing a better relationship now with planning and budget. So I think we should wait a little bit and let's develop that relationship and then we can do it. So that sort of thing happens a lot. And I also find that there's a kind of institutional identification that is big, you know, where people are in, you know, you run into the EVC in the shopper's corner, you know, the grocery store, and people want relations to be smooth. And so that contentiousness is immediately understood as, you know, being too aggressive, and it won't work.
Yeah.
I mean, those are some things that I've heard. And then I have another question. So those are kinds of some tactical questions, but also where does the $66 fix fit into your thinking these days? Because that was kind of predicated on the idea that the California public was, you know, not wanting to be taxed for this elite institution that doesn't actually serve that their children can't afford to go to any longer anyway. And the $66 fix kind of shook that up a little bit by saying, actually, for most taxpayers, it would be very little increase in order to return to free tuition and so on.
Yeah. I think that the first, two things. One is we have this fear of falling, you know, to quote the Barbara Ehrenreich title from 1990. It was a very prescient book, you know, where basically the white middle class was going to throw everybody overboard in its fear of being downwardly mobile, which it could already see was starting to happen during the Reagan period. And I think that's what's happened with us. It's you know, one of the smallest classes in the sociology major at UCSB have 90 people in them. That's a small class. They're discussions. But sociology professors are very reluctant to say, look, this is kind of a crappy major for you now. And I recommend that you try to do anthropology, or you just do Chicano studies, because they have fewer majors. You know, just because it's admitting that our quality isn't what we want to be. It's the same with like UC Santa Cruz, UC Santa Barbara, you know, the perpetual we try harder campuses, right, that don't get no respect from the flagships. It's like, are we willing to admit that we're not really a very good bachelor granting institution? Like, can we say that the BA of 2020 at UCSB is not what it was in 2000? Most of my colleagues will say no. So I think there's a getting over the inhibition about how we're not number one. And the schools that we're at, that we identify with, is like, how good is my career? Well, at least I'm at a UC. that we gotta throw that out the window. It's like, we need therapy. Like UC isn't, it's like it's not the place to be in that way, and that's fine. That's okay. We're doing this noble thing, but we need more, and we need to admit it's not good enough so that we can get more money for it. And then just like the last thing, the $66 fix, UC people are terrified, faculty are terrified of losing tuition income because they assume with total rationality that it will only get worse. We'll lower tuition and then the state won't give us the money to replace what we lose. So there's a quality anxiety that's connected with that also. That means that not only wealthy people don't support that, the top 1% of the senior management group doesn't support it, but faculty don't support it either because they just think it's going to be even worse. So there are these two, it's the same hurdle of, okay, so we're not at a good school anymore. I'm okay with that. Let's move forward and make it good again.
Gail.
So that was a great, amazing, and depressing talk, as usual. But one of the really interesting things you did was you identified a break in the discourse coming out of UCOP, the regents, and maybe the legislature about knowledge economy, blah, blah, blah. And you gave us something to say back to them that grows out of the current historical moment, which is you say you are for racial justice and racial equality, and look at what kind of a university you are producing and how it is out of sync with that. Now, I don't think that talking up to those people is the only place worth putting our energies into, but I wanted to ask you to think a little more about what that talking up piece of the project might look like, because the piece of it you didn't bring to bear directly on it is the COVID-19 piece. So we talk up and we say, you are failing on racial justice, which is something you have publicly committed to. And they say, but COVID-19 has destroyed the economy, so go away and come back in 10 years and we'll have this conversation again. So I wanted to invite you to think through that a little bit out loud.
Yeah, that is pretty much their position. Oh, well, forget about the next 10 years. Which we just forgot about, right, for the last 10 years. COVID, I just immediately think of the number. It would cost $1 billion to test everybody once a week to keep campuses safe at full capacity. Remodeling, redesigning tent cities for classrooms, that brings the bill to $2 to $3 billion. And they're going to cut us. We don't have 2 or 3 billion. So it's like, if you're serious about safe opening, you're going to have to not only not cut us, but think about additional funding for COVID. I don't know, the talking up for me is always getting over the inhibitory framing, which is you ask for too much, you're spoiled, you have it too easy, nobody else has what you have. And so some of it is just not knuckling under to this kind of shame discourse that, I really think that's kind of like the most important thing is just everybody's afraid we're going to lose our pension. Nobody wants to talk about how other people don't have defined benefit pensions. So, I think that's one of the reasons why UCOP didn't push for a proper state bailout to get us funded, so that campuses don't spend, to all the rest of their divisional budgets, that they don't spend on pay on benefits. The social science division on my campus spent $45 million in 2016, 2017. 24 million of that was salary, and another 14 million of that was benefits. And there was basically like $800,000 for everything else in a division that has, hundreds of faculty and thousands of majors. So it's, you know, it's like sociology has 1,600 majors, which is why all its classes are 90. Anyway, so Gail, this is, I guess I'm just saying I really don't know the answer to your question. But I think I know the psychological frame that we have to approach it with. The other thing that I think will work is metrics that are based on the kind of normalized social sciences that most of us on this call are not very interested in and think produces limited knowledge. So for example, the UQ surveys, I've been told repeatedly, work with the legislature. So they're pretty interested in hunger, housing insecurity, mental health issues, in part because those showed up as serious problems in surveys. They don't think that we have a quality problem because the surveys don't show a lower number of students saying that they didn't learn that much in college compared to 15 years ago. The problem there, of course, is that students don't know that they're learning less,
Right.
you know, because they're taking what is given to them,
Yeah.
and trying to have as good a time and as they, you know, and learn as much as they can. So if we could figure out some way of like either doing a survey that has questions that that are comparative compared to like what they expected they were going to learn or something like that, that would be helpful. But I think what would be more helpful is testimony from us, which would include some paperwork about what we experience now that compared to what we experienced before. I was just going through files and I found my first syllabus that I ever taught here at UCSB in 1990. And it was somewhere between a third and a half longer in terms of material than what I teach now. And I was just appalled that, my God, I made them read all this stuff. And then, you know, I like, oh my God, I was inexperienced and I was too hard on them. And then my second thought was, holy shit, they just assumed they had to read all this stuff. And they actually did. You know, my memory is that they did that. So showing, you know, those kind of comparisons, I think would help them understand it, because it would seem like we actually have hard data and not just sort of faculty impressions that there's been a decline that they have to reverse.
Mayanti, then Zach.
Thank you. I'm actually going to turn my video off because I think my connection's not great. Thanks. I have a sort of question. I'm glad that you just talked about your syllabi from now and from, you know, a couple of decades ago or a decade ago. I was just wondering whether you think that we also have to rethink and maybe reconfigure the way that we do pedagogy itself, because I think many of us, it seems like we ourselves were trained in and for a different kind of university. And I guess I wanted to hear a little bit more when you talked about, and I think you're right, that we at least discursively sell the university as having a public benefit, right? As for racial equity, racial equality, and for justice. But I was wondering if that also means that we need to remake ourselves as pedagogues in some ways as well, right? Because I'm just wondering whether, in fact, whether your syllabus, let's say from 15 years ago, is in fact the quality education that we want to be doing now. If the sort of land grant university is in fact a land grab university, if we're rethinking the way that we're imagining ourselves as teachers, do you also see ourselves as needing to kind of rethink what we're doing in the classroom, what we're teaching, how we're teaching, as part of this mission? Or is this strictly a question of sort of selling what we've always been doing, just in a different way?
No, I think that's a really important point. I think, I mean, it's door number one, right? We have to rethink this. And it means, you know, active learning. I mean, it means activation of students and, you know, sort of getting them fully engaged, as opposed to the old cliche, knowledge consumers as opposed to knowledge producers. So they have to become knowledge producers. And, I've written up lists of things that students need to be able to know how to do. Like there's like 13 things in one of the lists in the book. And, it's just like, it's essentially about knowledge production. So it's like research learning for college students. They learn how to create knowledge, then they learn how to enact the creation of knowledge in problem-solving projects that they do with other people that are in fact connected to university or to communities and not just universities. That then allows them to be full citizen knowers in the deep sense that we're trying to teach, that we're trying to do. I have constantly complained about the budgeting side of that because we don't have the money to do that properly. And I say that as a liberal arts student who I spent an hour a week for 30 weeks with my long-suffering thesis advisor. I mean, I must have gotten 100 hours of one-on-one time over the course of the year. And it made me, as a science student and turning into a humanities person, and it made me incredibly more capable than I was at the end of the year. How do we do that for, this massively diverse and super interesting contemporary student body without a ton more money? So I feel like we have to set the goal, those goals of active learning, and there are better terms than that, obviously. And then reverse engineer the budget so we can actually figure out how to pay for that. So, the flipped classroom was a kind of a dumb version of that the MOOCsters promoted, but they weren't wrong to say, hey, you're not giving any contact time in your large lectures to students. You say we have 0 contact errors. Well, what about you? It's like, yeah, I teach 200 students in my detective fiction lecture. I see maximum 20 of them once. I see 5 of 200 more than once, maybe 10. So they're right. So how do we fix that and create it's not going to be just more TAs or smaller sections. It's going to be some other fundamental shift.
Zach, Susan, and then the Anderson Thomas screen.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Chris, and for everyone else's comments. And this comment kind of builds on my auntie's pedagogy point. But I wanted to go back to the syllabus question and looking at the syllabus and how much reading we assigned. And I think one other thing that's changed that you mentioned in the course of your presentation that I'd like to just bring back there is the changing student profile. And I know that I think everyone would probably agree that you have more students now working multiple jobs or who have extended caretaking responsibilities for families and things like that. So in the changing profile of our students, they also have less time to actually do the reading. And I think that's probably a more generous way for us to think about it than to think negatively, like they're doing the wrong thing when they should be doing reading. But so in that question of the changing profile of our students and your broader call to rethink the UC system, which I appreciate, I also just want to put another question on the table that I don't have an answer for. And it's tied, say, to the question about also expanding our concept of union and solidarity to think about the role or the relationship between UC, the CSU system, and community colleges. And especially since now, as we all saw, educational delivery is our priority, connected, as you've argued, to tuition dollars and all these things. So I was wondering if that's something that you've thought about and if, and how we can put that on our plate as well.
What is that? Sorry.
The relation between the UC system, the CSU system, and community college.
Yeah, that's also a really important question. I just think solidarity. We're getting their students, and that means trying to fix their working conditions as well as ours. Nothing can be fixed with the funding structure we have now. And so it's just like, it has to be this gigantic ask. It has to be like a revolutionary demand. Students at community colleges need to have 100% tenure track students or professors.
But so it's
They're
part of
85% adjuncted. Yeah, but we have to start asking for them. You know, it's like.
But it's, I guess what I wanted to maybe put out there, I'm sorry the interruption, this is such a horrible format for these discussions, but is part of this broader call that you're making to rethink these systems, to think the borders between the systems and whether they are in fact separate systems.
Well, the border doesn't exist for students, right? I mean, they just come in. It's a big psychological deal for both the senior managers of the systems and the faculty in the different systems, because, you know, if we're at a UC instead of a Cal State, we have half the teaching load or less, right? So we immediately have a completely different career. And, you know, I mean, my hope is that we can start advocating for the working conditions for it. You know, a lot of our graduate students end up teaching in Cal State, so they are our people in a very direct sense, and trying to make the broader public understand, as well as its representatives, what we need. So a simple way to start that is just to try to redo the bond proposal that failed last time with a much stronger pitch for the integration of the systems in the way that the facilities need to be thought of as a package that serves the state as a whole, and not just, you know, this or that individual campus.
Susie?
Chris, thank you so much. I loved the concept of the third Reconstruction. And I really like the periodization you did and all of it. My question is a little bit following on Zach's. When you mentioned that you feel, you know, we're Santa Cruz cousins to you, I really have been thinking a lot about why there isn't more cross-campus coalition building. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts about, you know, so far all we basically have is sharing of online courses. I mean, there's almost no real systematic or systemic sharing of intellectual, pedagogical, and activist projects. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that, especially since you mentioned the grad students were successful at it with the strike, but faculty, no.
Yeah, we need structures. I think so. There's the hierarchical kind of snob thing that's part of it, but the Senate manages to overcome that pretty well, and that's one of the things I've always liked about the system-wide committees. Is, you know, there are people from every school. There's the Med Center people from San Diego talking to the art historians from Santa Cruz, and it's fine. You know, nobody does really like selfish promotion of their campus agenda. We joke about it. You know, like the guy from Berkeley this year said, well, we could use the whole $2 billion that's allocated in the bond issue just for fixing, you know, seismic problems at Berkeley. You know, and then we all laugh because he wasn't actually saying we need all your money, right? He was. One thing that the Senate, I think, should revive are those system-wide fora that used to happen back in the day, like just even before I came, before you came, where the Senate sponsored summit meetings. They were kind of like retreats, and they had topics, and faculty came together across the system to give, you know, little presentations and then discuss whatever issue was on their minds. So, you know, that's one of the sources of the Humanities Research Institute, right? Was a bunch of faculty that over a couple of years at these meetings, these system-wide meetings, said, we really need some humanities infrastructure. And Gardner got on board, you know, was the president then, and it kind of went from there. So that, I mean, that's just one simple place to start, would be the next chair of the Senate to say, you know, we need to have a retreat. We have some money. Senate actually does have a travel budget. And when we can travel again, spend a day in a room together somewhere.
And Mark and Megan?
Okay. It'll shock everyone here. It's me that put our hand up. So I have something that's kind of just a comment, but I think it's relevant to a couple of things that were just read, and it's really more of an anecdote. I happened upon our summer session page the other day and saw that they are offering UCSC summer session has a special offer. It's called Ambitious Summer Award, where if you do at least 15 credits over the summer, you get a discount. So they have a kind of fee schedule. I guess I was trying to, I don't know why I was here. What alarms me is that the fee schedule includes the cost to students for doing as many as 30 credits over the summer. And this speaks to, the reason this hooks in is it speaks to the metrics they care about and what they don't care about. Mm-hmm. And the kind of constant whittling down of the content. And if you work out, in principle, the number of hours that a student, that we claim a student would need to be spending on their coursework in order to accomplish those number of credit hours, 30 credits over the course of the summer is equivalent to 90 hours a week.
Yeah.
That they are in principle. So the fact that our summer session is advertising to students like, hey, you can do 30, it's God. Just, it kind of blows my mind, but it's also not surprising to me. Of course, summer session is like pushing this. Of course, they have a bulk discount. It just, so I don't really have anything to, yeah, okay, Mark has a question.
And I'll add, just because Megan discovered this as well, they're actually advertising to incoming freshmen, people who haven't even started to take summer school classes before you begin.
Yeah.
Right? Because time to degree
right.
Is such a big deal. And I guess I would add in, you know, what we found we have a new chancellor, and their emphasis when it comes to talking about race on campus, it seems to be all about graduation gaps.
Yeah.
Right. That's the metric that seems to matter there. And I think summer school plays a part of that. But anyway, I digress.
That's my question.
No, you're not digressing, because I think if faculty started to advocate for learning conditions for their students, it would first surprise the university and the public, you know, if we were like not talking about us, but talking about them. And if we coupled that with some really clear statements about course sequencing, you know, sort of coherent curricula, the need for advising, and the need for a pretty strict cap on the number of hours that students can work while they're in school, so that we are obligated to give them grants. We have to, you know, like do real financial aid and not these weird packages. I think that there would be a lot of public interest in that. I just, you know, we haven't said, well, look, I assign 2/3 of what I used to assign because my students are working 2/3 more hours a week, or 2/3 of my students are working more than 12 hours a week. You know, you could put it in a lot of different ways. That's absolutely crucial, you know, because there's just this kind of half-assed, it's like part-time college, and they're doing it to manage their debt, their future debt load, and to be financially responsible. And we don't seem to care that much about them. So we could change that.
Chris, I wanted to ask a question, a strategy question, and that is, as we're going to move into kind of another austerity phase, you know, I was interested in your let's tear it all down and build it up and start over again call at one point. And, you know, but there's one set of, one kind of calculus of politics is, university politics is, we want to do X, so we need more money. And we need to do this at the university level and at the statewide level. And what about stuff outside the realm of money? I mean, I think that, you know, there's the danger, of course, that if you show that you can do it without more money, then they'll say, well, great, you know, then don't have any. But I think you were also at one point in this talk calling for a sort of reimagination of how we do things that might be, that might have some avenues outside of give us money to do X.
I don't know. I mean, no is my answer. I'm not doing anything without more money. I don't think you should either. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean,
so what's an example of, it just feels to me like a speed up and like overwork. What I think we can do is flip it around and say, we really need to do X, and we need to do X. X means we need to restore senior seminars. Like, it is our judgment as professional educators that in the fourth year that a student is at UC Santa Cruz, that person needs to have one course every quarter that has fewer than 15 students. And here are the 7 reasons why they need to do that. And then it's like, you guys figure out how to make that possible. Pretty obviously, it means that you're going to have to hire 20% more faculty. So over 5 years, do that. And we can start with, exploiting lecturers and TAs, but we're going to try to move that to tenure track stuff. Another thing, research agenda in the humanities. Nobody thinks the humanities produce knowledge. Or the qualitative social sciences. They don't produce knowledge either. It's just like a lot of politics and woke browbeating. I mean, really, tons of people think that. And one of the reasons is, even people that are sympathetic in general to wokeness and to, emancipation as something that knowledge does, cannot paraphrase the product, the output, the findings of the research. They don't know what the process is. So another thing in the don't give us more money directly, here's something I need money for, is setting up research agenda. Like, what is Santa Cruz with the people that you actually have? What can you do that other people can't do? And then pitch it, like, here's a process. We're going to involve undergraduates in the research process. We're going to bring our graduate students into this process. We're doing some kind of collaborative thing. We're budgeting a bunch of private time for people to do their own work within this. And we really want this to, help put us on the map in a way that you, the chancellor, is interested in. And we've worked out a budget for it.
Good.
I mean, so we have to lead with the vision and not the ask for money. That's totally right. All I'm saying is, we've been shackled by the budgetary constraints for people like you and me and Susan for 3 decades. This is the 4th round of cuts. There is nothing to cut. My EVC said this today in the meeting. There is nothing to cut. Departments have 0 in their discretionary budgets now, before COVID. So it's like, do you want us to have, it's like real versus fake college. Are we going to have actual intellectual growth and development, or are we just basically passing people through? We're the only ones that can explain why we say that.
Okay, well, we'll work on that. I think the SCFA will solve all of these problems.
Good.
Next year. We got several people coming onto the board who are here right now, and looking forward to rolling up our sleeves and getting it done. And thanks, Chris. Thanks a lot for, not just today, but just for your inspiration, all over these years and the work you've done. It's been great to have you in the system.
I'm really always happy to talk with you guys. I mean, one of the things we could do, I forget who brought this up, is Susan, is just do this much more regularly.
Yeah.
It gets routinized. It only has to last an hour. You don't have to, but ideas will flow better if we're just consistent.
And maybe we could get a subset, sort of a KUKVA subset, and get it across the across the systems, people who are interested in, the kind of scale of rethinking that you're talking about, getting people from other campuses on it too.
Yeah. Kukva cocktails.
Kukva cocktail. Yeah. Talk to Connie about that. I think that sounds great. All right. And Peter, really thanks a lot to you for coming through on the tech side. That was such a saving grace.
It was nothing. What I'll do is I'll upload it to Drive and then email it to you, and you can distribute it to everybody.
Yes, we'll put it on the SCFA website.
Great.
And then get a link to it. Thanks so much for that. Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks you all. I was really happy to see you.
Thanks, Chris.
Me too.
All right,
Me
Peter.
too.
Thank you,
All right.
Chris.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Happy Juneteenth, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Happy Juneteenth. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.